Hello, Garland Nixon here. It is Tuesday night, so if I get a few people watching, I'm going to do a Q&A at some point. I'm hoping that we'll get enough people watching that we can have fun. We're going to talk about the reality, the current situation in Ukraine, the reality of it, and as opposed to what you're being told on a day-to-day basis. That's all. Hello, Garland here, and I see we got a few people here and one or two watching on Rockfin. So let's get together and chat a bit, shall we? And hopefully we'll get to do some Q&A at some point. So let's talk about the reality of Ukraine. Going into the war, going into when it happened, as you probably know, I didn't think it was going to happen. In hindsight, when I look back, it was, of course, the Monday morning quarterbacks throw all the touchdowns, right? So in hindsight, it's obvious how it happened. It's obvious why it happened. So we don't have to get into that. But here's something that I find interesting, and that is the reality of the facts on the ground versus the narrative in the West. And to me, that demonstrates the difference in culture. I work around a lot of Russians and have for many, many years. I mean, my mentor was Paul Robeson Jr. So, he talked a lot about Russia. He went to school in Russia, he went to school in the Soviet Union and grew up there. We talked a lot about the culture and things of that nature. And it's a conservative culture, but it is the old time conservative. It's not the neoliberal conservatism that we have here in America. That is just a blink away from liberalism. They're free spenders. They're uh, go along with the whatever the culture argues at the time. Whereas the Russian culture is very, very old culture, and they tend to be slow to change, slow to act, slow to move. There's an old saying about in the Russians that they're slow to get on their horse, but once they get on, they ride fast. Slow to get in the saddle, but once they get on, they ride fast. That's why they generally don't lose wars. They're slow to go to war, but when they go to war, they're tough as hell. You don't want to fight against the Russians, as we can see. Ask Napoleon, ask Hitler, on and on and on. But at any rate, so let's talk about what's going on here. What I found very early, my prediction before the war was, let's be honest, you're looking at a country that's a superpower, that it's Godzilla versus Bambi, right? So that Ukraine's not going to have a chance. And that was pretty obvious. So I'll give you my interpretation of what happened and where we are. Russia, I've heard any numbers from 15 to 30%. So let's go with the high number. So Russia, let's say they're employing 30% of their military power against Ukraine. That means 70% of their military might. They're not. I mean, they've used less than 5-10% of their air force. Practically nothing when it comes to their air force. A lot of helicopters, but not a lot when it comes to air power. It's been for the most part, it's been a ground war. They haven't put overwhelming numbers in that. Generally, they've been outnumbered by the Ukrainians, but they're so technologically advanced and they rule the skies because they have the technological advancement that they've, pretty much achieved every objective that they've had. What's interesting, though, is the narrative in the West, as opposed to the facts on the ground. The narrative in the West is the Russians are having a tough time of it, and that Ukraine is scrappy, and they've been fighting the Russians to a standstill, and the Russians get some wins, and the Ukrainians, they get some wins. And so this is a battle between two tough powers. It's a fight, and they're going to 12 rounds. And my research tells me that ain't the case at all. That right now, here's where we are, as an example. The eastern region of Ukraine, the Donbass region, is where the overwhelming concentration of troops have been for the Ukrainian army. I've heard numbers of anywhere from 60 to 100,000 in that region. So what you have is a very powerful military force in that region. However, because they don't have the air power and the air cover, and the Russians do, they're very vulnerable. And what the Russians have been working on doing is surrounding them rather than, the West tends to do. We just bomb, 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 bomb day after day after day, and then go in eventually and, try to mop up, and you have insurgencies and things like that. Whereas the Russians, this is more of a ground war. And they're going in there with people, they're going in there with tanks, they're going in there with armored personnel carriers, they're going in there up close and personal. And they are really taking towns and cities and things of that nature. Instead of bombing them from 30,000 feet and then going in to see what's left, they're taking the control of on the ground. And no, don't get me wrong. Have they made some errors? Certainly they have here and there, but they've been tactical errors here and there. I don't see that they've had a strategic error, because it seems to me that their mission is they're going to take a certain portion of Ukraine, and they seem on course for the portions of Ukraine that they want, that they're going to take. So the U.S. narrative, or the Western narrative, tends to go on a day-to-day basis. What happened on Snake Island? What happened in this town? What happened in that town? And the Russians more or less seem to be a huge strategic plan, which says, we got all these troops in the Donbass area. We're going to surround them and wipe them out. And once we surround them, then they have either one or two choices. They can either surrender or they will get annihilated. And that seems to be on course to do that. That what's going on now is that the Russians have surrounded the largest concentration of Ukrainian troops, and they're in the process of either one or two things. Either they're going to surrender, or they're going to get annihilated. And the Russians are taking city after city, burg after burg, town after town, cleaning them completely out of the enemy. And when they are done, they're going to have all this stuff. That's it. Ukrainians are out. The military is out. And not only that, if they take, not if, there's no if here. When the Russians take this huge concentration of Ukrainian troops, right? They're basically, they're isolated. They built this big concentration of troops in an area, but that means that they could easily get surrounded and they could easily get done in, right? And when they're dealing with a more powerful military force, it just doesn't work out well to put yourself in one place and get surrounded. And that's kind of what they've done, and that's where they are. And they're taking astronomical casualties. And now the mainstream media in the West is not saying that, not telling you that, but my research tells me, I'm not saying that I'm right or wrong. I'm saying this is what my research tells me, that the Ukrainians are taking astronomical casualties, that their troop concentrations are being preyed upon by Russian artillery, and they're just getting a lot of people wiped out. I've heard numbers of 700 to 1,000 a day deaths. So I don't know for sure, but it makes sense. And let me tell you why a lot of this makes sense. Because if you look at the initial numbers and the technological advancements of the Russians against the Ukrainians shouldn't even be in the fight. And in a way, they've had some scraps here and there, but they're not really in the fight strategically overall. They're just scrapping and holding off a tactical little battle where they engage a number of tanks or a number of APCs, armored personnel carrier, and they may win or fight to a standstill in this little area or that little area. But in the big picture, they're getting devastatingly attacked with huge concentrations of artillery fire, and that is very, very difficult to stand up to. And the West, in a way that is highly irresponsible, is simply egging them on. It appears to me that what the Ukrainians should be, if we're honest about it, if you have a lot of young men, and not so much young anymore, the Ukrainians are more desperate. And what they're doing is they're taking anybody they can get up to age 60. When you see some of the pictures, you can go on Telegram, you can see a lot of different videos and things of that nature of Ukrainian soldiers being taken prisoner, and all kinds of everything from the battlefield. And what you see is a lot of these Ukrainian soldiers who are like hair white as snow. They look like they're older than me, for God's sake. And you're like, it's obvious that these are conscripts, that the Ukrainians just went and grabbed every male that they could off the street, put a uniform on them, and sent them to the front. And some of them don't even have boots. They got on like a pair of Nikes, like whatever they were drafted in, they were sent to the front with some camos, and a lot of them, unfortunately, a lot of these people are just cannon fodder. Imagine you or me and somebody was sitting around making videos, and one day and the next day they knock on the door and say, we're putting camo on you and send you to the front, and you're sitting out there with Russian artillery falling around you all day, tearing everybody to shreds. Not a happy time. And I think that's where we are in Ukraine. And the true folly here, and I believe that in time, this is going to come out, that the Ukrainians should, in all honesty, they should surrender. They should come to some kind of a diplomatic resolution here, see what the Russians want, and give it to them, because this is really ugly, and and entire generations of Ukrainians are just getting mowed down by artillery, wiped out, humongous losses. And the truth is going to come out. And one of the things that we're starting to see in Ukraine, believe it or not, and you see this on Telegram, you see this, that's the importance of Telegram, that it's not censored. So you can find out all kinds of stuff that you're not going to get on Twitter and Facebook and YouTube, where Scary Poppins is singing one of her disinformation songs. And what you find out is, I lost my track a little bit. It'll come back to me, but you get the picture. That the bottom line is that, oh, I know what I was going to tell you. Came right back to me. I told you it would come back to me. Well, there's something going on in Ukraine. They're starting to be in Western Ukraine, in Kiev, and there's starting to be some demonstrations where the wives and family members of these soldiers that are just taken out to the front are starting to have protests. And they're saying, what are you doing? You're taking our husbands and you're taking them to the front. You're throwing them out there like cannon fodder. They're not even properly trained. You give them a gun, you stick a foot, one day a guy's freaking sitting in front of the TV, and the next day you stuck a gun in his hand and took him to the front. His wife's not going to be happy. They're not in the physical condition to do that. They're not physically capable. They're not well trained. And you're putting them out there against trained Russian soldiers with the finest equipment in the world. They're just going to get mowed down. They're just going to be out there, and these freaking 155 millimeter rounds are going to be dropping, throwing shrapnel all over the place, and they're going to get torn to shreds. It's suicide. And we're starting to see that. And I think you're going to see more and more of that in Ukraine, because you got these people whose family members are just being grabbed by the government and taken out there to die. And the sad thing about it is, if you think about it, it's not even for Ukraine. Let me explain. Initially, we were told that Ukraine is an independent sovereign nation. Russia attacked them unprovoked, and they're defending their country, right? Well, people found out bit by bit that it wasn't unprovoked, that this was about NATO's expansion to Russian border and Russia pushing back against that. Even the Pope said it, right? The Pope said it's about NATO barking at Putin's doorstep. It's quite simple. Okay. So you find that out, so when they said the country is independent and it was an unprovoked, well, it's not unprovoked, but it's not provoked by Ukraine. It's provoked by the United States, because NATO is just a tool of the United States. NATO is not independent of the United States. That's not like independent will. It's what NATO is the tool that the United States used to assume control of all of Western Europe's foreign policy. Right. So it's the United States barking at Putin's door. That's basically what the Pope, paraphrasing, that's what he said when he said NATO's barking at Putin's door. So let me add this. Recently, when people at first said it's a U.S. proxy war, they said, no, that's Russian propaganda. Recently, there was a member of Congress who was on TV saying this is a U.S. proxy war. The U.S. is at war with Russia through Ukraine. Well, first of all, I don't know any Americans that voted for that. I don't know any Americans that want war with Russia. We don't want to die in a nuclear holocaust. That's number one. Number two, doesn't that contradict the argument that Ukraine is an independent country, sovereign country? If Ukraine is independent and sovereign, then we can't possibly be fighting a proxy war, because that would mean that Ukraine's not independent and sovereign. That would mean that that Ukraine is like a tool of ours, and we're using that tool to fight the that it's the ground of Ukraine is like a boxing match, like a neutral ground. And so Russia's in there fighting, and we've got some other people fighting for us as proxies, so we don't have to fight um, Russia. Well, if that's the case, shouldn't those soldiers in Ukraine be told that? Shouldn't they be given the option? Shouldn't their wives and families and children have been told that? Shouldn't we say, look, your war is not for Ukraine. You're not fighting for your homeland. You're fighting for the United States. But we don't want to fight Russians, so we're going to put your bodies out there to catch Russian bullets, because if we fight them, our people won't support it and it could be dangerous, right? So the reality is they lied to us and they lied to Ukrainians, and they hyped up and pumped up the Ukrainians to hate Russians, right? Remember, not part of the Ukrainians. The Nazis hated them, and they helped the Nazis in Ukrainian and the fascists in Ukraine hated the Russians. So they helped to spread that Russian hating ideology throughout Ukraine. I forgot how many, 30-40% of the Ukrainians are Russian or pro-Russian. So they pretend like they don't exist. They only talk about the ones that don't like Russia. So the United States took that anti-Russian ideology and used it against Ukraine to convince them to stick their bodies in the way of Russian bullets between us and Russia. The Ukrainians are victims of this, except the Nazis. But in a twisted way, even the Nazis are victims of this. But you ain't going to catch me feeling sorry for goose-stepping Nazis. So anyway, what I'm saying is, the whole thing is a lie to the American people. And it's a money laundering scheme again. What happened? They just did this Lend-lease. And another thing I got to add before I get back to the state of the war, they just did this Lend-lease thing. And what is that? They just signed off on Lend-lease. What that is, it's what we did during World War II with England and the Soviet Union. If they couldn't afford to buy weapons, we'd say, we're going to lend you the money. In other words, we'll build them, we'll pay for them now. You can pay us back later. It took a lot of these countries 60 years, a couple of these countries 60 years to pay us off. And we're talking about Britain and the Soviet Union, two countries that had the economic wherewithal to pay us off. In reality, what happened? We bought the stuff and said, you pay me later. So what Lend-lease really is another way for the American taxpayer to buy weapons, give them to Ukraine with the idea that Ukraine's going to pay us back later. But Putin's going to rip Ukraine in half, and he's going to keep the half by the sea. He's going to keep the industrial half. The reality is there is no way in the world the rump state of Ukraine, what's left of Ukraine, will ever be able to pay us off. So it's just another way for the Biden team and the Republicans alike to find another way to shovel money into the hands of the military industrial complex, and meanwhile tell us that they're doing us that we're not paying, that Ukraine's paying for it. That's absurd. Oh, by the way, let me tell you, I'm putting the URL for the let's see if that works. Okay. I just put the URL for my Rockfin stream into the comments, and I'm hoping that lots of people will click on that. Let me see how many people we got over there on Rockfin so far. Wow, 17 people. 17 on Rockfin. So let's try to get more. Smash the like button before you go. Click on that and go to Rockfin, as many people as you can, because you never know when I'll get tossed off of YouTube. Don't forget, you can if you're on Rockfin, they've got a tip jar. You can do $5 tips, and that's awesome, or whatever amount you want. And if you're on YouTube, you can do super chats, which is highly appreciated to help get my site going and get everything going. I really appreciate those who are helping. All right, and let's continue. So that's the money part. On the ground, it's what we would expect, and that is that, number one, the Ukrainians are not making the decisions. The U.S. and the Brits, etc., are telling the Ukrainians what to do militarily. And a lot of it, see, the Russians are making military decisions. They're making military calculations. And a lot of these days, the types of warfare that they do, a lot of these calculations are made off mathematical formulas. They have formulas for this stuff, right? And then they have contingency plans. So people are like, oh, what the Russians are doing didn't work or did work. Look, when they went in, a modern army now will have a number of, particularly if you understand how the Russians fight, they're going to have a contingency plans. This is what we're going to do. If these things doesn't work, we can do this, we can do that, we can make adjustments. So they didn't go in there with a single plan. They went in there with a outcome. When we're done, this is what we want. So the what I would call the collective Putin and his advisors, the people who were his advisors, got together. They decided what outcome they wanted. The military experts then put together some options, and then they said, execute your option. And now the military people are in charge of doing that. And they make their moves. Now, when there's something militarily, such as what was going to happen at Azovstal, they would oh, that link is to create a stream. Oh gosh. Oh, okay. So okay. So I'm not doing something right. That's weird. Oh, create a stream, huh? Well, you know what? Go to rockfin.com/Garland Nixon. Okay. Because if you do that, at least when you go to rockfin.com, yeah, /Garland Nixon. When you do that, you'll be able to find me right away. So I will put that up and we'll put that, there we go. Rockfin.com /Garland Nixon. Yes, and you'll see the live thing up and you can go from there. How's that? Sorry about that, gang. All right, now where was I? So at any rate, so you have a army in the Russian army who has an outcome that they are working towards, and so they're using military means to get there. On the other side, what I seem to see with Ukraine is this: the United States government and some NATO troops from different countries and some NATO leaders and some UK leaders and MI6 and CIA and all of these mishmash of people telling them what to do, giving them, here's some intelligence on this or intelligence on that. So they get spotty stuff, they get advice, they get things from all different directions, but there's not a unified command. And you know what you get when that happens? You get the hell beat out of you in war. Because one person has a unified command and plan. And might I add, because they're dealing with a modern army, very early, using missile strikes and standoff attacks, their supply lines are cut, their lines of intelligence are severely compromised, their lines of contact and radio and communications are severely compromised. Their aerial ability is severely compromised. So they're a lot of times flying blind. And a lot of times what you've got is groups of soldiers, be it a brigade or a battalion or whatever the case may be, deciding what to do. But some of them are flying blind without having their part of the war being part of the war, right? So that you've got a group of soldiers here and they can go out and fight. But to go out and say this group is doing this to hold these people in this area, which is going to allow these people to flank and these people to attack from that area on a large scale as part of a smaller plan and a larger plan and a strategic or a master plan, they can't really do that. And that's what the Russians are doing. So, of course, what's going to happen? Well, here's what we're seeing happen. The time is coming quickly, within weeks, I think, where the only thing you're going to have in Ukraine is a narrative that's pushed by the West and scattered areas of resistance. Now, some of them may be larger than others, but the main part of the army is going to be annihilated. And because the U.S. and who runs this thing will not tell these huge concentrations of troops that are surrounded to throw in the towel, to retreat if they can retreat, or to work out a deal and surrender or do something to save their lives. A lot of them are just going to get wiped out, just completely wiped out. And I believe the time will come when a lot of these people, these family members in Western Ukraine and in different parts of Ukraine, are going to wake up and say, when are our sons, brothers, and fathers coming home? All of them. And we want them back. And the government's going to say, there's none of them left. They're all dead. They've all been wiped out. Where you're going to have entire cities where they grabbed all the men and sent them to the front, and all of them are dead. All of them are gone, annihilated, wiped out. If they're lucky, a few of them, got surrendered. And maybe I'm wrong. I think they're going to get some pushback. I think when you have entire cities that say, where are all of our sons? They're all dead. Where are all of our husbands? They're all dead. Where are all of our fathers? Well, there's a couple of them, but pretty much they're all dead. that the Ukrainians aren't, mothers and wives and children aren't going to say, hooray, they died valiantly. Oh, and what happened? We lost the war anyway. That they're not going to be happy about that. There's going to be some people angry and some people pissed. And there's going to be some soldiers that surrendered, some soldiers that survived that are going to say, you've already seen that. You already see this. There's that are going to be unhappy. There's videos coming out of Azovstal, the Nazis. And they're angry, saying they've been abandoned by their government, which it's not a matter of they've been abandoned by their government, which they have. It's a matter of their government couldn't do nothing anyway. They're overmatched against the Russian army. And these were fools to think. The reality was that these fools, they got armed by NATO and the US, and they thought they could provoke a war with Russia, and then NATO and the US would come in and fight with them and they could win. You poor suckers, you don't understand how the U.S. Works. They send you out to get mowed down like cordwood. They ain't coming to help you. Never were, never will, ain't happening. They're not losing a soul for these people. Number one, they want to see lots of you guys die and lots of Russians die, and they're happy. You are there. Your job is to die, to catch Russian bullets, and to sacrifice as far as the U.S. empire is concerned. You're better off with the Russians. If you surrender, the Russians will spare your lives. The U.S. won't. Okay, so at some point, I believe in the long run, soldiers who are veterans of this war, family members who lost their loved ones, are going to start, at some point, they're going to be unhappy. They're going to be angry, and they're going to complain, and they're going to gripe. And the U.S. is going to get some pushback. And the other part of it is because of the economic disasters and catastrophe that the U.S. and its vassals and its puppets in Europe are causing, the populace that they are impoverishing and that they are sentencing to a horrific existence of poverty and hunger and strife, they ain't going to be happy either. But the reality is right now, all the people in charge have is a narrative. You may not believe me, you don't have to. The Russians are winning overwhelmingly. They were always going to win overwhelmingly. Now, let me add something else about that. And whether or not the Western leaders are drinking their own Kool-Aid and they think the Russians are not, well, that's up to them. It doesn't matter. It ain't going to change the outcome on the field. The only thing I would say is a little dangerous is this. Not a little dangerous. It's all very dangerous. In not allowing anyone to talk about the reality that the Russians are winning an overwhelming battle strategically and in every way, shape, or form, that they are so the Ukrainians are so overmatched that they never had a chance. There could be those in the West, unlike the military knows the truth, that may say, well, why don't we get involved while the U.S. and NATO will go into Ukraine and we'll make things right? Because here's the truth. The Russians only using 30% of their military. If NATO comes to the Russian border and wants a fight, yeah, NATO's going to lose that fight. I mean, people are like, yeah, the U.S. wants to get involved. Well, that would really be disastrous. What happens if you get involved? You lose too. The Russians have been taking it a little bit easy. They don't want to flatten everything and bomb everything flat. They want to maintain the infrastructure. If NATO and the U.S. comes in, then it becomes an existential war. The gloves are coming off, and it's going to get ugly. And does NATO and the U.S. want to lose the kinds of soldiers, the numbers that they have? I mean, the UK doesn't really have a military. Germany doesn't have a military. France has they've got somewhat of a military, but the others don't have much of anything. So NATO is the US. So what is the US going to do? Send a lot of 100,000 lightly armored soldiers in to get massacred by the Russian standoff attack? I mean, yeah. Could the U.S. missiles and things of that nature cause some damage to the Russians? Yeah, but on Russia's border, you don't want that fight because you're going to lose. So I think the military was continually advising them, look, you guys can dance all you want to, and you can convince the public that the Russians can't fight. But if we go in there, we're going to get our asses kicked. And we don't want to do that. So that's the only good thing that might keep us. Two things that might keep us out of there is we don't want to go in there and take a beating, possibly. And the other thing is the U.S. empire would have to give a shit about the lives of Ukrainians, and they don't. It's not like the Ukrainians are losing and we got to go protect the Ukrainians. They could care less if every Ukrainian who's ever born dies the first day of the year. They don't care. They are the Ukrainians for the U.S. empire. Pawns are there to be sacrificed. So for the Biden team and the Victoria Newlands and the neocons, they see the Ukrainians' lives. It's like, I'll put it like this. You ever have a fish, a predatory fish, like in a tank, and the way you feed them is you go to the pet store and you buy, they call them feeder fish, little ugly looking goldfish that are different colors, and you buy these feeder fish and you bring them home and you throw them in a tank, and you're whatever, you might have frogs. A friend of mine have albino frogs, and he throw these little minnows in there and the frogs would eat them or whatever. So if you have an animal that's a predatory animal, you may buy feeder fish. I remember I knew someone, I don't like snakes, but I knew somebody that had like a boa constrictor, and he'd buy feeder rabbits. He had a big cage and he'd put them in there. And when the snake was ready, he'd grab it and squeeze it and eat it, right? That's what the Ukrainians are to the neocons. Their job is to be eaten. Their job, their lives are dispensable. The neocons see them not even as humans. Sadly, they probably got less respect for them than they do for the Russians. So sadly, the Ukrainians have been thrown out there by the neocons to get wiped out. So the idea that the neocons are going to wake up one day upset because the Ukrainians are getting mowed down and want to avenge their deaths, that ain't an option. The only thing would be if they felt like, oh my gosh, we're getting embarrassed, so we got to go in and set things right to fight the Russians. But again, they know that they can't set things right. If they go in, they're going to take a beating. So they go in, they get embarrassed even worse. And let me add this. I believe that the neocons, the Jake Sullivans and the Victoria Newlands, are inherently cowards. They ain't picking up a gun to go fight anybody, and they don't want a nuke come flying in their back window. They've got their nice condos in DC or Capitol Hill or wherever, or in Northern Virginia. They're living well. They're eating pan-seared rainbow trout, with a couple slices of avocado, and some garlic mashed potatoes. I mean, they're eating well. They're sipping expensive wine. They're wearing the finest clothes. They're living a good life. They do not want a scenario where a nuke comes flying into DC and they're vaporized. So I think because they're chickens, they understand the reality of nuclear war and they don't want to be vaporized. And the idea, and this is what some people say, well, they've got bunkers. Well, think about this for real. Let's just say you've got a bunker and you can survive. Here's the I've talked about this before. Here's the reality of people say, but rich people have bunkers and neocons have bunkers. Here's the reality of that. If you have a bunker, let's say right now, which is probably the case, the Russians have submarines off the East Coast with hypersonic nukes on them, right? What's it going to take? 8 minutes? Those nukes have a 1,900-mile range, 1,900-kilometer range. Those hypersonics run 10, 11,000 miles an hour. Let's say they fire it from 500 miles out, 400 miles out, 300 miles out to sea. It ain't going to take long for that to find its way in. So let's say they fired and you got 5 minutes. Let's give you the long time. You got 10 minutes. What are the odds if you've got a nuclear bunker that at any given day or time of day or night, you're going to be within 10 minutes of a shelter? If you're Jake Sullivan, you might be in Nevada. You might be in the Middle East. You might be in Europe. You might be in meeting with NATO allies. But the odds that you're just going to happen to be within 10 minutes of the shelter are zero, which means if you've got bunkers and shelters, you would have to know like a day ahead of time that nuclear war was going to be tomorrow. Then you would have to transport there. And then once you got there, you'd have to, get in and all that and get set up. You wouldn't be able to okay, the missiles have been fired. You got 10 minutes. My God, I'm on an airplane over so-and-so. Yeah. Or I'm in downtown DC in traffic. I'm at the White House. I'm at wherever, and I'm in traffic. You can't get out of traffic. If you had a bicycle, you could get out of DC faster than you could in your motorcade. So you're done. And they know this. They don't want to commit suicide. I ain't saying it ain't going to happen or it couldn't happen. But I do think we can take some solace in the idea that the chicken hawks are chickens before they're hawks. So I think the idea of a nuclear war, because every now and then you'll for all of their bravado, you'll hear Jens Stoltenberg or you'll hear Joe Biden say, look, we don't want World War III. We don't want war with the Russians. They want to step up to the line. Now, not saying they may get their toes off the line over the line at some point. That could happen. But I think that the people who really call the shots, who really have the power, are telling them, look, you can step up to the line, but we don't want to die. Well, I'm a billionaire, multi-billionaire many times over, and I'm trying to, control the world. I can't control the world if I'm dead and there's no world of control. So let's not take this thing past the level where we're all dead, and then being a billionaire is no good because I'm a dead billionaire, and a dead billionaire is the same as a dead homeless person. So I think, could it happen? Yeah, but I think the odds of it aren't that high. So as we'll go on. And by the way, let me see. Oh, somebody says EMP weapon. Again, that would cause them great problems too. The bottom line is here and now, and let me say this about what I think about the Russians. Not just think, I'm pretty sure. The Russians feel like this, and rightly so, that the U.S. empire's intent was to take their country and steal their resources and break their country into pieces and just keep all of their stuff and leave them impoverished and who cares, dead, whatever, right? And they're right. They believe that, and they're right. That's the problem. So because they believe that to be so, and the U.S. and NATO was building up on their back, getting closer and closer and closer, building more military bases and militarizing their border, or encircling them with militaristic, with bases and weapons and missiles and things like that. They looked at it and said, man, this is dangerous. You guys need to stop that. And the U.S. said, you can't tell us what to do. And NATO, why we can do whatever we want. We have to protect ourselves from you. And Russia got to a point where they said, okay, you better stop or else. And the U.S. said, ha, 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 you think we're listening to you? And then Russia said, okay, well, then we'll go to war. So Russia feels as though there is an entity that wants to take them apart, destroy Russia, and they're fighting for their lives. And they're right, actually. So that means there ain't no end to this. That means that they're not going to just back down and lose. They ain't going to lose. There's nothing. They will fight with everything they have. Now, the only thing I think it will be interesting is this. There is no question they'll win in Ukraine. And when they win in Ukraine, the Westerners will have a narrative. And the narrative is going to be, they wanted more than this and they didn't get everything they wanted, so they lost. I mean, you know how the West is. You know how the Biden people are, the neocons are. They just changed the narrative. So they're saying everything about it. What will happen too is Europe is going to take such economic pain that the leaders, so-called leaders, are going to have to deal with uprisings at home. The disastrous, catastrophic results of their foreign policy is going to create distrust, and it's going to create instability, political and economic instability, and they're going to have to deal with that. And I think what's going to happen is the Russians are going to make their move. They're going to do what the hell they want, which I believe is they're going to take Ukraine all the way. They're going to take Odessa and Kharkov and all of that crap, and they're going to make they're going to completely deny Ukraine, what's left of Ukraine, access to any ports, to the Black Sea, to anything. They're going to be completely cut off. So I think that's what we're going to be looking at. We're going to be looking at a Ukraine left as a rump state. Now, let's go back. In December, the Russians gave a list of demands to the West. And it wasn't just about Ukraine. The Russians also said, we want to get those damn missiles off our border in Poland and Romania and stuff like that. And we want you to go back to where you were in whatever year it was. You know, in Israel, they always say 1967, but maybe it's 1991 or 96 or something. But whatever it was, they had some very specific demands about their borders. And they said to the U.S. and NATO, look, damn it, we want you to back off our border. We want Ukraine to be a certain way, and we want some other things to go on with missiles, and we want that to happen, right? Or we'll take military, technical, military slash technical actions. The US and NATO's answer was, you have no sphere of influence. You don't get a say in here. You don't get a veto. The US said, we're not listening to any of this crap. We're not listening to you. Sorry. All of this stuff is not even a starting point. No way. Right. And Russia says, wham, at that point. Okay. If we can't talk, then we'll fight. So Russia said, boom. Okay. So I suspect the time will come when Russia will complete their move in Ukraine. The time will come. And I think Russia has gotten to a point where they said, look, the time's going to come where we're going to come face to face with NATO. NATO's coming after us. They're coming at us, and one of two things is going to happen. Either we're going to deal with them now or deal with them later, so we'll deal with them now. I believe, and I could be wrong, that when Russia is complete what they wanted to do in Ukraine, which is they're going to take a certain part of Ukraine, and when they've gotten what they want, they're going to close that off. They're going to say that's ours. I do believe after that Russia, and I could be wrong, but let's not forget, Russia had a whole list of demands for their security. I think Russia's going to say, okay, we're done with phase one. Ukraine's cleaned up. We told you to get the hell off our border with Ukraine. You wouldn't listen. So we did what we had to do. Now that's done. I do think Russia's going to reissue those demands and say, now, part two, we asked you to get those missiles off our borders in Romania, Poland, whatever. If you don't, we're going to take military/technical actions. Now, do we have to go through this again? We know how this movie ends. We told you that we had demands for security for our borders. You didn't listen. We did what we had to do. This is what I think is going to happen. I think they're going to say, now get those missiles off our borders. What do you have to say? Now, at that point, NATO, the US, the European countries already know how that story ends. At that point, Russia has already clearly demonstrated how they feel and what they're willing to do. And at that point, I think it'll be this. NATO countries, we don't give a damn. If NATO countries, or if you're going to come to our border and you're going to build missiles and bases and all that shit on our border, then you want to fight. And if you want to fight, you're going to get one. If you're thinking this is going to make you more secure, then you're going to find out it ain't. And I think at that point, Russia's going to say to NATO, you got to decide whether or not you want to fight. If you come back to us with that bullshit, you don't have any sphere of influence, and you can't tell us what to do and all of that, then we fight. I think because Russia has made those demands, and I don't think they're negotiable. So what happens after Russia gets finished in Ukraine and they've done succeeded? I think at that point, now keep in mind, time is not on the side of the Europeans, because by then Germany's going to be a shithole. The industry is going to be gone to hell. The job situation is going to be terrible. There's going to be Ukrainian refugees running all over creation. People can't afford to eat. Same for the UK. Same for France. So they're going to be dealing with unbelievable internal economic strife. And I think the people in those countries are going to be fed up. And they're going to say, look, we can't eat now. And I think they also understand something very important. When Russia was at war and this isn't a war, because Russia really, it's a military operation. Russia, they've only built 20-30% of their military might. This is not a war. It's a military operation. So I think that at that point, the people of Europe will be hurting economically bad. And they're going to look at their leaders and they're going to say, we want you to deal with our economic pain that you've created. And you're going to see some changes of governments, right? And will the leaders of Europe say, we know how this ends? We already know Russia's made another demand. We got two options. We can get off of their border and we can say, okay, Russia, look, we don't want a war. We're going to pull these missiles off of your border. Because are those missiles on the border to protect Europe? Not if it means that they're if Russia says to Europe, look, get the missiles off our border and back off our border, or for sure we go to war. How can NATO make the argument that NATO is there to make Europe safer? If their options are keep their missiles on Russia's border, keep all of their military might on Russia's border, and have Russia go to war and smash the hell out of it with hypersonic missiles. Is that what they want? Then here's the next part. And you know good and damn well, right now, there's plenty of gas, oil, all that stuff going to Europe. If they don't back off and Russia says, look, get those missile launchers out of Romania, and NATO says no, and Russia strikes the missile launchers with hypersonic missiles and blows them all flat, right? And NATO's like, we're going to shoot back, whatever the case may be. You know instantly the gas is cut off to Europe. At that point, instantly, if NATO and Russia are shooting at each other, there ain't no way in the world Russia's going to keep selling them gas. At that point, and here's the thing about it. What if Russia does all this and they wait till, I'm thinking October. So next fall, and this is what I'm thinking, next fall, let's say September, October, and Russia says to Europe, now where were we? We're done with Ukraine. Get these missile launchers and all this other crap, get it off our border. You're threatening us. We want to have and Russia comes back to them again and says, we want to negotiate, because that's what they said. We want to negotiate a security settlement in Europe that's indivisible, that nobody's security gets their security dealt with while compromising the security at somebody else. We're ready to do this. But if you don't, we're ready for that too. And Europe already knows how that story ends. And they also know that if they say no and Russia starts shooting and you get into a hot war, that they may be annihilated, with it. If they fire nukes, that Russia's going to flatten Europe and then it's a nuclear war and it's done. So they already know it's an existential threat for them. And they also know that if they start shooting at Russia and Russia's shooting back, their gas is done. At that point, their economy, everything is wiped out. So at that point, Europe has to make a decision. Do we completely wipe out our economies and maybe wipe out all of us just so we can keep some missile launchers on the borders of Russia? That's going to make us safer, really? I think eventually Europe is going to have that decision put before them. I really think so. At some point, they're going to have that decision made before them. All right. So a couple of things. Let's answer some questions. Can Russia invade the U.S., please? One of the reasons, a good question, one of the reasons that Russia's military is so powerful is because of the way they utilize it. The U.S. has the largest, most powerful military in the world. The Russians is the second most powerful military in the world, in all likelihood. Why is that? Because the U.S. military, but that being said, in the area of Russia, in Eastern Europe, Russia has by far the most powerful military. By far. It would take the U.S. a year to build up enough troops and hardware and things of that nature to fight Russia. And by then, Russia would flatten it all with missiles and air force. So we couldn't do it. The British have already admitted that if they tried to protect, as they said, one of their top generals was talking to Parliament. He says, well, if we tried to, what would happen if we tried to, say, protect Latvia from Russia? And he said they'd flatten the Russian Air Force would destroy our military in a week. So here's what Russia's done. They've created the second biggest military in the world, but it's all in one spot. We got AFRICOM, we got Middle East bases, we got 200 bases in the Pacific, we got bases all over South America, we got bases everywhere but the moon, right? So this big powerful military, since we're trying to rule the world, is spread all over the world. The Russians don't have many bases. And you know where they're set up to guard? They're set up to guard one place, and that is their border with Russia, with Eastern Europe. That's the focus and concentration of their power in the biggest kind of way. So they have They're not, they only got one aircraft carrier, and that's out of service. Why? Because the Russian military is not set up to project power around the world. They're not an imperial power. They're not trying to send troops all over the place and project power all over the world. What they're trying to do is be set up to protect their border, and that they can do in spades. So no, they wouldn't be looking to invade us, because that's not even how they project military power. Let's see if we got some other questions from some other people. I have a suggestion for Lindsey Graham, but unlike him, I would go to jail for similar suggestions. Let's see. Crystal and Kagan, Newland's brother, we're suggesting nuking Russia. Well, always. Look, Bill Crystal and Kagan, they've always got that kind of stuff. John Bolton, you know, they've always got that kind of stuff to say. Nuke, 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 attack, bomb, go to war. That's all they know how to say. They're psychos. Anything else? Let's see. Golden silence, Graham for endless war, of course. Mediterranean fleet in Syria. So Russia does have some assets in Syria. They have bases. They have a base in Syria that's heavily armed. They have some aircraft in Syria. They've got a Mediterranean fleet. So they do have some military hardware in the Mediterranean. They can project some power in the Mediterranean, but not like the U.S. is set to. But they do have some power there. And let's not forget, here's the thing about it. They've got these damn missiles. Those hypersonic missiles have a 1,900 kilometer range, pinpoint accuracy. And I mean, you know, as I've said before, they can be fired from subs. If the United States has 12 or 14 aircraft carriers, that's 12 to 14 missiles, because a hypersonic missile at 12,000 miles an hour hits that, it's going to tear that thing to shreds. The damage is going to be unbelievable. So, and what happens if they hit each one with two? So the reality is they can do horrific damage in a hurry with those hypersonic missiles. And the U.S., no country in the world has any defense at this point, any air defense against hypersonic missiles. It's nobody has a defense against it. So yeah, they've got some power, but over and all, they are set up to defend their border. Let's see what else we got here. Has anybody got any questions? Circumnavigate. How long can Russia continue to call this a proxy war with a straight face? Here's the thing about this. Russia has a strategic plan, and their plan is to secure their border. So they know it's a proxy war. They understood. The Russians beforehand, when the Russians came out in December with their demands for their border, what they said was, we ain't talking to the Ukrainians, and we're not talking to some NATO idiots from Europe. The United States is the master. They're the only one that matters, and we'll talk with the United States about this. We don't want to waste our time talking to Europeans. So the Russians well understand the dynamics they're up against. They know what it is. And so the Russians have to make decisions as to what's in their long-term interest, how much they want to escalate. That's it. They can decide how much they want to escalate, depending upon provocations and things of that nature. But I think they're sticking to what their plan is with Ukraine, and they're not going to be sidetracked from it. Let's see what we got. Ideas are laser and or railguns point defense to counter the hypersonics. Yeah, there's ideas, but there ain't nothing to counter it yet. There's nothing but ideas to counter them, but there ain't nothing to counter the 10,000 mile an hour, 12,000 mile an hour missiles. All right. How funny will it be when China has copycat versions of all these fancy Western weapons? Well, here's the thing about it. They're not going to, because one of the things that we're finding out, and with some of the, I've read a lot, and apparently the Ukraine, such as the British, has the in-laws anti-tank weapons. And what I've read, the problem with that is they're not great in the cold, and the battery dies too quick. And we've been sending a lot of these other Javelin anti-tank missiles, and apparently the issue is that some of the weapons that we've been sending have not been as effective as we believed that they would be, as we believed that they would be. So we're getting to find out about the effectiveness of some of these missiles. And from the looks of things, China don't want to copy them. And China has their own stuff. They've got great technology. They don't need to copycat ours. In fact, they are testing hypersonic missiles and hypersonic glide vehicles as it is. So it wouldn't shock me. Russia and China are very, very close. Would I be shocked if Russia gave China hypersonic technology? Not really. And China is very, very high tech, so they're close to it. Now, the U.S. doesn't have hypersonic technology, but keep in mind something. When you talk about hypersonic missiles, they go so fast that they create like a plasma bubble around them. I mean, it's really some intense technologically advanced science that you need to have those things and make them work and make them accurate. So it isn't easy. And apparently the US can't do it yet. Saying kill Putin is encouraged, but not Zelensky. Yep. Because look, people like Lindsey Graham and these people, they've just rhetoric. That's it. They're, chicken hawks. They're not picking up a gun. They're not going to war. They're going to sit there on Capitol Hill and talk bull crap. How do you see the Germans breaking neutrality and building a $100 billion army in the near future? I think that within several months, their issue is not going to be the army they're building. Their issue is going to be internal strife because they're wrecking their economy. So they're talking about that and building and all this kind of stuff. But I do think that the economic pain coming to Germany is going to be the most significant issue that their government has to deal with. The Schultz government, I can't see it lasting but so long. I don't think it makes it to the end of 2022. People are going to be pissed when they can't afford to eat for any long period of time, and it continues to get worse. And what happens when fueling crisis? What happens right now? The King Salman in Saudi Arabia right now is in the hospital. So what happens if he dies, and which is possible, and there's a little bit of a unrest, instability in Saudi Arabia as to whether or not Mohammed bin Salman, Mohammed bin Nayef, who becomes the president. It's because, I mean, the king, think about it. It was supposed to be Mohammed bin Nayef. He was in line of succession to be the next king, but the king, Salman, changed the line of succession and said, no, it's going to be MBS, Mohammed bin Salman. Well, what happens if the king dies and some factors say, we don't like that, we want this other guy in? And the U.S. could be one of them. There could be some instability. If that happens, what the hell do you think is going to happen to the global oil market if Saudi Arabia's government becomes unstable? So we got some big problems coming up with oil, and I don't see it going down anytime soon. Village Idiot High, Mike Pompeo already painted a target on his back. NATO is sending Ukraine a Xerox pictures of weapons they requested, building them like they have actually sent them. It's a good con for everyone involved. Very, very good point. Because Russia's blown up the trains and the bridges. So once they get these weapons to Western Ukraine, how do they get them to the front? How did they get them to the front? They can't get them there by train. Russia's blown up the train bridges and blown up the electrical generators and the electrical, I forgot what those things are called, but the substations that provide power to these electric trains. So they can't, I mean, and how do you move howitzers? It's got to be by train. Or what are you going to do with the rest of this stuff? Truck it by road and have the Russians blow it up from above? Then when you get it there, what are you just going to cart it off? You're going to say to the Russians who have like encircled these troops, hey guys, step aside, hot stuff coming through, like you're in a restaurant and the waiter comes by, hot stuff coming through. You think the Russians are going to be like, come on in, give those guys the howitzers so they can fire at us and then we'll break it. No, you are correct. It's BS. A lot of it is BS, and they know it. It is public relations. Once GOP wins in November, will be heavy pivot to Taiwan. Agree. Yeah, of course. And Biden doesn't care. He's a warmonger. But yeah, the idiot Republicans. Look, what is it? The deal. The people, the oligarchs in America who are into commodities, who want oil and gas and gold and metal and things like that, they want to go to Russia and steal all of Russia's shit. The industrial oligarchs who make stuff who are upset because now China has taken their markets and China is outperforming them. They want to go keep China back so they can. That's all it is. This is a war between factions of the ruling elite class. That's all it is. And the one faction of the ruling elite class is upset with China because of the industry. The other is upset with Russia because Russia's selling gas and oil and won't let them come in and develop it. That's all it is. We're just pawns caught in the middle. There is no democracy or anything like that here. It's a bunch of crap. And then meanwhile, you got a bunch of idiots running around in America with, we've got a new variant wave. All right. It's the sheeple variant. So you got all these people infected by the sheeple variant. So the last thing that they've been told, the current thing is to support the Ukrainian, so quote, whatever that means, support the Ukrainians. So next they'll be told to support the Taiwanese or whatever the hell you tell them to do, they're going to do. But I do think, again, the U.S. is going to have problems because as we fall into recession, people are going to be saying to our government, hey, man, I'm unhappy. I can't pay my bills and I can't eat. All of the Western countries are going to have that to deal with. And it ain't going to be as easy to start a war. So we'll see. RSFO Warhouse was right. Duopoly just loves war. Warehouse. Ukrainian needs the North Koreans to push the trains around. And what else do we have? Anything else here? Hi, Chicken Patty. There we go. Good old Coop. We love Chicken Patty. Not just PR to send the weapons, but big money for the defense industry. Absolutely. And our money. Neocons have ethnic hatred of Russians. Well, it certainly do. And I guess that's it. I guess what's happening, Coop, brother Coop W. So that's it. I want to thank everybody once again on Rockfin. They've got a tip jar, and on YouTube they've got a super chats. I want to thank everybody. I've got a Patreon page. You can go to patreon.com/Garland Nixon. Help me out there. Certainly appreciate that. What's Nick have? $33 billion for lethal aid. Ukraine will get $3 billion out of our out-of-date weapons. The military complex will get $30 billion. Bad news, the Democrats have upped it to $40 billion. And the Republicans are mad because they want to make it $48 billion. That's what we got now. That's what we got. Look it up. The Democrats have raised it to $40 billion, and the Republicans are upset because they want to make it to $48 billion. And of that $33 billion, $20 billion of it was going to go directly to weapons. So it's all a fraud. 10 billion to U.S. people. No. Yes to 40. But yeah, what do we get? $600. That's what we get. $600 or $1,400 to last us a year when they do a shutdown, shut all of our business down, shut everything down, and they give us like $1,400 or $600 or something, and that's too good for us. They don't work for us. They don't care about us. They can't stand us. All right, thanks a lot, everybody. Don't forget. Yeah, we do need a new Smedley Butler. Don't forget, rockfin.com/Garland Nixon. I need everybody to sign up, and hopefully everybody can hit the old tip jar, but I need everybody to sign up. I need everybody to go to patreon.com/Garland Nixon. If it's $1, $3, I mean, come on. You can't do $1 a month, $2, $3 a month, $5 a month. We got to get this thing going. We got to get this media outlet kicking. So I would appreciate everybody can do that. You got to sign up. Let me see how many people I got signed up. I don't see right now. I have, wow, 348 followers on Rockfin. We got to get to 1,000. We got to get over 1,000. How's that? Thanks a lot, everybody. Oh, holy moly, Alan G. Thanks a lot. Alan G came up with the big fiver. Thanks a lot, Alan. Certainly appreciate it. Jeff says he just signed up there. Chicken Patty, yay, chicken. We're tight. Or what do we got here? Do Panic says, where are the sane people? They're right here, man. They're right here, Do Panic. We are the sane people. We are the sensible ones. We are the ones that understand this. And I'll say, I said this on my radio show the other day. I might have said it online, but I'll say this. You got three groups of, in a jury, you got 12 people, 3 groups of 4. The first group only listens to the defense. The arguments. The second group only listens to the prosecution's argument. And the third group listens to the defense and the prosecution. Who is going to be best able to make a fair and reasonable decision? Who's going to be able to render the most fair, reasonable verdict? The 4 people who heard both, right? And what we're being told by Scary Poppins and the Disinformation Board and their ilk is that we're only supposed to listen to the prosecution. We're not supposed to listen to the defense. We're not supposed to listen to any other witnesses but the prosecution. I'm sorry, that's bullcrap. And the people here listen to both sides. And if you listen to both sides and you get an understanding for this thing, you understand the truth. And the truth is that the neocons are low-life psychopathic scumbags, and they started this thing. And that the truth is, here's the truth. And from my perspective, the United States empire needs to get the hell off of Russia and China's border and stop causing mischief on other borders. Stop trying to run the world and be the world hegemon. We don't have 850 bases around the world because we're seeking peace. We don't have 850 bases around the world because we're trying to do the right thing and trying to make things better. We've got that because we're trying to run and control the world as a unipolar power. And here, even worse than that, when the United States does that, the people in the United States don't even get a piece of it. We don't even get part of it. They are extracting wealth from us in the same way they're doing it from other countries. It isn't working for us. All right. Thanks a lot. I appreciate everybody. Don't forget, go to Rockfin. I only got 348 followers, and I got like 3,000 followers here. So I need 3,000 followers on Rockfin because, as I said, you never know. Wake up tomorrow morning and old Scary Poppins sings a song that says Garland Nixon's doing disinformation and his ass is out of here. And boom, I'm clicked off who knows what. But the people at Rockfin, they ain't like that. They're going to give us an opportunity to say what we got to say. And I'm going to be doing some stuff on Rockfin by the by that I won't do here. Oh, and guess what's happening Saturday morning? Saturday morning, Scott Ritter and Ray McGovern. That's right, 10 a.m. Saturday morning. Pass the word. Ray McGovern and Scott Ritter, 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. I'm going to have those guys for an hour. We're going to have another great chat. I know you don't want to miss Scott Ritter and Ray McGovern. Love those two guys. They're brilliant. There'll be plenty going on by the end of the week. We'll have some huge stories, and we're going to have two of the best minds available on this on these subjects. All right, Scott Ritter, Ray McGovern, 10 a.m. Saturday morning. Be there. Peace. I'm out.